Okay, today I'm gonna talk about use memo and use callback. So what is the purpose of these two React hooks? So use callback and use memo is mainly used for improving the performance of a web application or to optimize the performance, right? Before we talk about these two hooks, we need to know first when will React render. Either state or props change will cause the whole component re-render. And the children state change will not cause the parent component re-render. And optimizing performance of web React application is mainly about preventing non-related component re-rendered. Right? I'm gonna show you then what is a non-related component right here. So now I have components. Instead of this, I named the first folder called pure component. I'm gonna explain this name later, why it's called pure component. Suppose I have a parent class, parent component, which extends component. I have a class child extends react.component render return child component. Right? Because it says here will cause the component re-render entire component re-render. So I need two, right? So because the re-render action will occur recursively. So the one component, parent component, is not entire component. So there must be some other components so that we can demonstrate, the real life scenario, right? So I have count value 0, count value I have a click this to change the value of count. To start set state count this state.count at 1. Okay, now I click this, value has changed, right? So what is non-related component? Suppose in the parent component I have console log parent component rendered. I have a child component rendered. Click this. As you can see here, so in the console, parent component rendered and child component rendered. So now the state of parent component has changed, and the parent component rendered. That makes sense. But there's nothing, there's no like related state or prop has changed in the child component. So to improve the performance of the overall application, we want to keep the child component still, right? We don't want a child component render, right? Because nothing has changed in the child component. So how do we solve that, right? So when we click this, the change value of the count, it will only cast the parent component render instead of child component. So right here, we use the pure component. So how pure component works? So how do we use that? It's fairly simple. Just extends pure component. This is a class component, and later we're gonna give you an example of function component and how use memo and use callback works. But we need to start from here. So how pure component works? So pure component prevent state change. Prevent child component rendered when the state of parent component changed. Okay, so from last example, when we extends component, so the state of the parent component changed, and both of these two components have been re-rendered, right? Now we extend pure component. Let's just take a look at this again. So I click this to change the value of count, parent component re-render, parent component re-render, and parent component re-render. So it means that the child component has not re-rendered, right? So because we extend pure component, it will just improve the performance of the overall application, right? It will also prevent child component re-rendered when prop child component has not changed and other state have changed in the parent component. So now I'm gonna pass a prop to child component. So now I just pass a count and this dot state dot count. Now I click this change value of count. As you can see here, so both these two components has re-rendered. Why? Because you pass this thing to a child component, so the prop of the child component has changed. So this child component has to be re-rendered as well. As you can see here, either state or prop change will cause the entire component re-rendered, right? And children's state change will not cause the parent component render. But when we extend the pure component, so when the state of the parent component change, it doesn't really matter. But when you pass this state to child component, so the prop of child component change, it must re-render. Suppose I have some other values. I pass a number as prop. Click. Only parent component render, right? Now I pass a or string, right? That's test string. Parent, right? Pass a class instance property as prop. Obj name vehicle age 20. Click parent. Now I pass a different value from state. So suppose I have a different, is called different. So right here, state different. Parent, right? So you might wonder why I show you this in details. Because when you pass different things, different type of things to child component in function component, this is a class component, right? We have a class. This is class component. So if we are using function React hooks, we use it in function component. When you pass different props, it will behave differently. So I'm gonna compare this later. So how memo works. Now I have shown that how to prevent the child components or non-related component re-rendered when the state in the parent component change. Now I'm gonna show you the exactly same thing from function component. I'm gonna remove memo for the moment. I have a function called child, which will return something like this. Child component, and we put this child into parent, right? Parent and a child, right? So again, let's test those things. Um, let's count 0. Count value. Click this to change the value of count. So parent component re-render, child component re-render. Alright, so it is exactly the same thing. So now parent component, because this is the first time this page loaded, right? So if I click the change the value of count, parent component re-render, child component re-render, right? So it behaved similarly to compared to the class component right now, right? So how do we prevent this? We just wrap this child component with memo, which you can just treat this thing as extends pure component. So click the value of count, parent, right? So now still it looks like what we have from class component, right? Is once you are using the React.memo, then you can prevent the child component when the state of the parent component change. So what is the memo? As you can see here, actually this is a function, and this function accepts a component, and finally it will return another component, right? And so this memo is called higher order component, but even this is called higher order component, but this is a function which will return a component, and this component prevents that the non-related component re-render because the state or prop change from the parent component, right? So when state of parent changed, yeah. So now it is a little bit tricky here. It's starting to become tricky. Okay, so prevent child component re-rendered when props of child component has not changed, and others. So now I'm gonna give so option B, right? So now I'm gonna try the same thing from here. First, I'm gonna give it I'm gonna pass the count. To child component. I click both changed, right? Because the prop of the child component has changed. Now suppose I have another value. So I called show. It's false. So I add a button. Show value. Show. Add a button here says show So as you can see here, when we click the show button here, the show value will be changed, and the parent component should change, should be re-rendered, right? And compared to show, the count value didn't change, so the count value is not related to when we pass this to child component, and this is not related to parent component, right? Because only show value has changed. Either state or prop of the child component has not changed, so child component is supposed not to re-render, right? So let's try it. Why the show value is empty? Oh yeah, it's empty because we need a true. False. Right? True, false, true, false, true, false. Right? Now we click this to toggle the value of show, and we pass the count value as a prop to child component. As you can see from the console that right, so from console that the child component has not changed, right? So what if the show value is not set by use state? Instead, it's just a value. It's called let show false. So right here, if we want to toggle the show, so show is equal to show, something like this, right? Sorry, I did this wrong. So it should be show should be still here. Instead, we don't declare count using use state. Instead, we do count equal to 0. So we don't need this count anymore because we don't want to change the value of count. We only want to change the value of show, right? And when we change the value of show, the count value won't be changed. So the state or props of the child component won't be changed. So the child component is not supposed to be changed or re-rendered. So toggle the value of show parent. It works perfect. It just works perfectly, right? Still, it works perfectly. So prevent child component re-render when props of change has not changed and other state have changed in the parent component. So pass string or number as prop, because right here it's a number, right? So I just don't want to try string, but it's exactly the same thing. So pass right here, it is class instance property. This is the official name, right? As actually it's just an object, right? Okay, this is the most tricky part. Click this to toggle the value of show. As you can see here, so parent component re-rendered and child component re-rendered. Why? So why? Because if the component should be rendered is controlled by should component update function, there is a API in the should component update named shallow equal, which will return true update or false not update. So how it works? Why right here? So when you pass an object in the function component to the child component, then the child component will be re-rendered and the memo does not work anymore, because should component shallow equal compare new state and old state at the same time compare new props to old props. It will only compare if its value is there or equal when you pass primitive data type as prop. So true or false, boolean value, string, number, they are all primitive data type, right? So the shallow equal will compare to, the old prop and a new prop. So when they compare, it will find when the count value is 0, it will find that 0 is equal to 0. So the child component will not re-rendered. Shallow equal compare if objects are equal then compare how many, the less, the count, compare how many k's in either old prop or new props are equal. At last, we'll compare if all keys match each other. So what does this mean? Suppose I have a count right here, right? So I have a count 1. I have a count 1. So it will just compare the address of these two objects first. Because they are all reference data type, right? So the count 1 and a count are not equal because they are representing different addresses. So if they are equal, they will compare how many K's do they have. It says, oh, count have 2 K's, and this one have 2 K's as well. At last, they will compare if the name is equal to name and age and equal to age. Why is called shallow equal? Because it will never compare the values. So as long as you have a name K and age K, then if this is not equal, this hello world, shallow equal does not care about that. So it will never re-render. It will never re-render the child component, right? Because they have the same address, they have same the count of K's, they have same K names. Then the child component will not re-render. But right here, as you can see, the child component has re-rendered. Why? Because every time you run this parent component, and this is a function, eventually this is a function. So every time you pass this, the count, the address of the count have changed, right? Because each time the function has been called, the function has been called, it will initialize another count with different addresses. I can show you that right here. So let obj equal to name vehicle. That obj1 you can name a figure. As you can see here, so they both have 1k and they have same k called name, right? But are they equal? Object strictly equal to 1? Object 1? No, false. That's the reason why the children component has re-rendered. Because your prop, the prop you pass into the child component has already changed, right? Because each time you toggle the value of the show, so the parent component will just run again. This is a function, and you just call this function again, and you just give another. Even though the object is same, you just assign another address to an object, right? So in these 2 times, the count has changed. Count address has changed. So when it comes to shallow equal, if objects are equal, they are not equal because they are using different addresses. So this is the reason why. Right, the child component has changed. But eventually, we want to prevent child component re-render because we took the show value, right? Nothing has changed. Um, the count value has not changed, right? So how do we do this? Of course, we do finally use memo. Yes, finally. So how do we use that? Use memo will return a cached or memo-ized value if you have not changed the dependency. Right? So how do we use that? Right here we do use memo. Right here you need to give this a dependency. So we cannot use this anymore. It's called value. Yeah, right here we just show value.name. Okay, now I took the value of show. Again, parent, 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 parent. Right? So, yeah, as you can see here, so it will not lead the child component render again, right? Because each time, as long as the dependency did not change, the value of this use memo return is always same. So it means that the prop will never change, right? So value, sorry, parent, right? So this is how we use memo, and use memo return a function as prop. So this is a value, right? So suppose I want to use a function as a prop. So right here, I'm just get rid of this. Get rid of this. I have a function called increment. Right, so right here I'm gonna pass this to increment. Yep. Okay. So now I didn't use any memo, right? Use memo. So I click the toggle of the show. As you can see here, so parent component re-render and child component re-render. Right. So the function here, Yep. So how do we do that if we want to prevent the the child component render? Again, we use use memo again. So right here I want to do let's do this, collect this to value parent, right? So return a cache value if you passed it. Yeah. So return a function as a prop. So use memo first argument is a callback function which will return a function as prop. And the second argument is an array to store the dependency. Okay. So you will monitor something, right? So if something has not changed, then you want your use memo return the same thing, right? So suppose there is some variable here, right? So if this variable has not changed, for example, this variable is count, right? So suppose this count has not changed, and only the right here the show value has changed. I don't want this return different thing, right? So you can just put a count here, right? But in this case, I don't put any dependencies. You can just try it yourself later. So then there is another thing called use callback. Is the similar, is pretty much shut hand of use memo when it returns a function. So what does this mean? Now you return a function right here, right? So as you can see here, so the syntax here is a little bit complex. So suppose I don't want to do a callback function, and inside of function, in that set of this callback function, I will return another function. I can just remove this and remove this, and right here I'm gonna do use callback. I click the value of show parent, right? So now I pass it as a prop. We can just right, simply use it. Click this to use prop function from parent class component. Count, sorry. Increment, right? So the prop works perfectly. And I click the toggle the value of show, toggle, right? So still, we change the value of the show, but the child component didn't re-render, right? So it is pretty tricky. It took me several days to arrange how I'm gonna express how it works, right? How to tell you guys how to do this, right? So it's pretty tricky, and yeah, basically this is how we use it. Right? So the last thing is use memo to avoid heavy recalculation. So there is another use case of the use memo. Right here I'm gonna 3 heavy calculation. Okay, so suppose I have, let's do rect function cal parent component. In this case, we don't need a child component, but anyway, so right here, I'm gonna change it to 3. Yep, parent component. So suppose I have a function here. It's called calculate, and calc function is running. So what do we do inside of this? We do a heavy calculation here. So what is heavy calculation? So for example, return total sorry. So right here I have total value after calculation. Click this to add 1. As you can see here, so each time, so the total value after calculation. So what is total value? Suppose the count is number 5. The total value will be 1 add 2 add plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. And suppose the count is 10. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 9 plus 10. So then it will return total value. So this is a simulation of the heavy calculation. Right? Sometimes when you print a table or you print a list, right, you will do much more calculation than this, right? So suppose I click this to add 1, 2, 3, 4, and what? This should be 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry. So calc. What am I displaying? So turn. Oh, this is I and a Y. I have a typo here. Okay. 1, 3, 1 plus 2 plus 3, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, right? So as you can see here, so each time we do, we clicked add 1 to count value, the calculation will run once, right? So this is not quite right because suppose I have a use state show false. Because when I toggle show value, set show as true and false and true and false, each time I click, I just toggle the show value, the calculation function will run whatever, even though we didn't change the show value, right? We did not change the show value. Click, 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 right? So we click the toggle show value, but there's heavy calculation. So in the real world project, we change some value and nothing to do with this calculation, but this function will still run. It will just take much more resources, right? So this is not quite right. So I want to do is when I change the count value, then the calculation function should run. But when I change the show value, the calculation function should not run. So how do we do that? How we use memo to prevent this? Again, we just because this use memo accept a callback function will return something without the change of the dependency. So gonna put it outside, and I will just let total equal calc count. Yeah. Now I just wanna simply add one use memo. Now I change the count value. why total is not displayed. Because we didn't return. Okay, so I changed the count value. Count is running, and the calculation finish is complete. So when I took the show value, as you can see, I cleared several times, but the calculation function didn't run because we set up the the count dependency here. Yeah, it won't work because the dependency is empty. So you either just set up one dependency or just leave the array empty, but you cannot just leave the second argument empty. So yeah, so by this way we can just prevent the heavy calculation function run when there's some other state of this component changed, this component change, right? So this is how we use the use memo. Several use cases right there. If you can completely understand what I'm talking about today, you can use memo as the only way to prevent the the child component re-rendered in any way, or avoid a heavy calculation function running all the time in the background when some state of your component has changed. So this is how we use memo and use callback, and use memo and use callback can exchange and so this is pretty flexible and it's pretty tricky. So basically, you just remember that theoretically, when you create a new class function, you just extend pure component to prevent, and when you use function component, which is more complex in this scenario, you just use a higher order function memo to wrap your function component. Then when you want to try to prevent the non-related component render, you use memo, and use memo accept a callback function. We will return something, and you have to configure a dependency yourself. So it will just take a lot of more time to understand how it works, but it is very useful once you get it. So yeah, this is pretty much about the use memo and the use callback today.